The cold expanse of space stretched endlessly before the USS Titan, its hull gleaming in the dim light of distant stars. Captain Aria Harper stood at the command console, her hands resting lightly on the controls. Her sharp eyes scanned the view screen, absorbing every detail, every fraction of movement. Behind her, the crew of the Titan moved with precise efficiency, the hum of the ship's systems filling the air with a low, constant vibration. "Status report," Aria's voice cut through the steady buzz of activity in the bridge, sharp and measured. "All systems are green, Captain," said Lieutenant Tessa Monroe, her voice steady. "We're on course for New Eden. ETA, 12 hours. Aria nodded without turning. New Eden. Humanity's last bastion in this corner of the galaxy. They'd lost so much, Earth, countless colonies, the souls of friends and family, to the relentless march of the Enders. And now, the Enders had returned. Aria had known this day would come, but that didn't make the burden any easier to bear. She clenched her jaw, the memories flooding back. The face of her younger brother, smiling up at her the last time she saw him. The smell of her mother's cooking, the sound of laughter, all lost to the alien scourge that had annihilated Earth. The Enders had come for them before, and they'd come for them again. Only this time, it would be different. They weren't running anymore. "I want a full sweep of the area," Aria continued, her voice cold. "If the Enders are already in system, we need to know." "Aye, Captain." Monroe's fingers danced over the console, sending out a burst of scanning pulses. A beat passed, then another. "Nothing. Nothing, Captain," Monroe said, the edge of tension in her voice. "Good." Aria turned sharply, her eyes locking on the young officer. "Keep it that way." Monroe swallowed hard but nodded. Aria turned away, her gaze settling on the view screen. The vast emptiness of space seemed both serene and menacing. She couldn't afford to show weakness, not to her crew, not to herself. The weight of command pressed down on her shoulders like an iron anchor. "Captain, we're receiving a communication," came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Jalen Voss from the comm station. His voice carried a sharpness that matched Aria's own. "Who is it?" "Unknown, but the transmission is direct. No encryption." Aria's eyes narrowed. "An unencrypted transmission?" The Enders were many things, but they weren't careless. "Put it through," she ordered. The view screen flickered, and then a voice came through, cold and emotionless, yet carrying an undercurrent of malevolence. "Captain Aria Harper," the voice said, its deep, resonating tone sending a shiver down Aria's spine. "You have no place here. You have no future. This galaxy will be ours, as it always has been. The Enders will cleanse your kind. Leave now, or face extinction." The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a lingering silence in its wake. Aria stood frozen for a moment, her jaw tight, hands balled into fists. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to let it show. The Enders didn't just speak, they announced their arrival with the cold finality of a death sentence. She had never heard one speak before, not directly. That voice, it was unmistakable. "Harbinger," she muttered under her breath. The leader of the Enders, the one who had torn apart Earth so many years ago. He was back. "Captain?" Monroe's voice broke through her thoughts. "What are your orders?" Aria took a steadying breath, pushing aside the rising tide of fury. "Raise shields. All weapons to full readiness." "Yes, Captain," Monroe replied, her voice low with apprehension. The crew could feel the weight of the moment. The Enders had spoken. They were not just a threat, they were a promise of annihilation. "Voss," Aria said, her voice now laced with steel. "Send a message to New Eden. Alert them that we're coming. And tell them to prepare for war. The Enders are here." "Understood," Voss replied, his fingers already flying over his console. The minutes stretched on as Aria stood, staring out into the void. Her mind raced, calculations, strategies, and contingency plans swirling in her head. The Titan was one of the finest ships in the fleet, but against the Enders, it might as well have been a paper boat. They had technology beyond human comprehension, power that made her weapons seem insignificant. And yet, she couldn't let the fear paralyze her. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. "Captain," Voss called again, this time with urgency. "We've detected an anomaly. Something's coming through a rift in space. It's big, Captain. Really big." Aria's heart skipped a beat. A rift? The Ender's signature was tied to anomalies like this, dimensional rifts that allowed them to traverse the stars with impossible speed. "Brace for impact," Aria ordered, already moving toward the command seat. "All hands, prepare for evasive maneuvers." The Titan lurched as it adjusted course, but the rift had already opened. Through the rift came a vast, impossibly ancient vessel, one that dwarfed the Titan in both size and design. It was a ship built from dark, incomprehensible materials, and its surface seemed to shimmer with a malevolent energy. The ship's silhouette was both beautiful and terrifying, an art piece made of death. "Weapon systems online," Monroe reported, her voice steady despite the tension. "Target locked." Aria looked at the colossal ship, her mind racing. They were outgunned, outmatched, and yet there was no choice but to stand and fight. "Fire everything we have," Aria ordered, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. The first barrage of the Titan's weapons lit up the darkness. Brilliant streaks of energy lanced through the void, striking the Ender ship with explosive force. The ship shuddered, and for a brief moment, Aria felt a flicker of hope. But the Ender vessel barely seemed to notice the attack. It retaliated immediately, unleashing a wave of energy that shook the Titan to its core. The bridge rocked violently, throwing Aria forward. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to her feet. "We can't outgun them," Monroe said, her voice filled with disbelief. "Captain, they're—" "I know," Aria cut her off. "But we don't need to outgun them. We need to survive long enough to get to New Eden. Full speed ahead." The Titan surged forward, dodging another wave of destructive energy, its crew bracing for impact. But Aria wasn't backing down. Not today. Not ever. The Enders had arrived, and she was going to make them fight for every inch of this galaxy. The Titan shuddered again as it narrowly avoided another pulse of energy from the Ender ship. Aria Harper's knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the command chair, eyes flicking rapidly between the readouts on her console. The crew worked in practiced synchrony, their every action a response to the overwhelming force bearing down on them. "Shields are holding," Monroe reported, though the tension in her voice was palpable. "But we can't take another hit like that." "Keep us moving," Aria barked, her gaze locked on the vast, dark vessel looming in front of them. "Engage evasive maneuvers. If we don't make it to New Eden, we're done." Her mind was running 1,000 calculations at once. They couldn't outgun the Enders, not directly. They had to outthink them, outlast them. She wasn't going to let her crew die here today. "Captain," came Voss's voice, cutting through the noise. "We're picking up more rifts. There are more ships inbound, at least a dozen. They're coming from all directions." Aria's heart skipped. "Damn it. Can we reach the station before they overwhelm us?" Monroe asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Aria glanced at the sensor readouts again. They were close, so close, but even one more burst of energy from the Enders could push them off course, delay their arrival. They had no margin for error. "Not if we're slowed down any further," Aria replied, eyes narrowing. "What about countermeasures?" "Still working on them," Monroe said, though she didn't sound confident. "The Enders' technology, it's different. We can't just jam their systems like we do with other alien species." Aria gritted her teeth, turning toward the comm station. "Voss, any word from New Eden? Have they received our warning?" Voss's fingers danced across his console. "No response yet, Captain. It's likely they're being jammed. Or worse, they're already under attack." Aria nodded, then faced the view screen again, her eyes narrowing as the enormous shadow of the Ender ship loomed even larger. She couldn't afford to think like this. There were no distractions. There was only survival. "Lieutenant Monroe," she called out. "What's the status of the fighters? Are we ready to deploy?" Monroe hesitated for just a moment. "Ready, Captain. But against that ship, they might not stand a chance." "Send them out anyway," Aria said. "We need to buy some time." "Understood," Monroe said, her voice low but resolute. The ship's launch bays rumbled as several dozen human fighters were deployed into the fray, streaking out into the vastness of space to engage the incoming Ender ships. Aria could only watch helplessly as they darted toward the oncoming threat. She prayed they'd at least slow the enemy down, even if they couldn't destroy the enemy ships. Seconds ticked by, stretching into what felt like hours. The Titan bucked as another wave of fire from the Ender ship hit their shields. Aria's jaw clenched as she watched the energy readings spike. It was too much. "We're taking damage, Captain," Monroe said, her voice strained. "Shields are down to 40%. Hull integrity. 65%. Aria stood, pacing the command deck, her boots thudding against the metal floor. "Keep moving. We can't afford to stop. We need to." The ship jerked violently as a massive explosion rattled the bridge. The lights flickered, and an alarm blared. "Report!" Aria shouted, her heart racing. "We've been hit." "A direct shot to the starboard side," Monroe shouted, her voice now tight with urgency. "Hull breach in Section 12. We're venting atmosphere." "Seal it off," Aria snapped, her hands tightening into fists. "Get those sections secured. We don't have time to bleed out here." She knew their chances of survival were growing slimmer by the minute. The Titan was taking a beating. The crew was exhausted. And the Enders? They hadn't even begun to show their full strength. "Captain," Voss said quietly, his voice almost reverent. "There's something you need to see." Aria glanced at him, confused. "What is it?" "On the sensors," he said, hesitating for just a moment before pointing to a new, strange signal. "A small anomaly, not like the Ender ships, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, the view screen changed, zooming in on the source of the signal. A small ship, not much larger than a transport, appeared out of nowhere, appearing from a rift in space. It was surrounded by a faint, glowing aura, an energy field that seemed almost familiar. Aria's eyes widened in shock as she saw the markings on the side of the ship. "Human. A human ship. What the hell is that?" she whispered. It's one of ours," Monroe said, staring at the display in disbelief. "But how? There's no way they should have survived." Aria turned sharply, gripping the edge of the console. "Bring it up on comms. Now." Voss worked quickly, tapping into the communication channels. Moments later, a crackling voice came through the speakers. "Captain Harper, we've been trying to reach you for hours," the voice said, shaky but unmistakably human. "This is Captain Ethan Price of the USS Vanguard. We've just emerged from the rift, brought along some unwanted passengers." "Captain Price?" Aria's heart leapt. "How are you still alive?" "It's a long story," Price's voice responded, tinged with weariness. "But right now, we're dealing with something worse than the Enders. We need your help, Captain." "The Enders," his voice faltered. "They're not just attacking us. They're trying to erase us. Not just kill us." Before he could finish, the transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only static in its wake. "Voss," Aria said, her voice suddenly sharp with urgency. "Get a team ready. We're going to intercept the Vanguard." Whatever Price was about to say, it changes everything. Monroe turned toward her. "Captain, we can't afford a detour. New Eden's right ahead. The Enders." Aria shook her head. "I know. But something's happening. Something bigger than we realize. We can't let it slip through our fingers." As the Titan veered toward the coordinates Price had provided, Aria felt the weight of the coming storm settle in her chest. The truth was unfolding, piece by piece. And every second brought them closer to the heart of the Ender's real plan. The Titan strained under the weight of its mission, hurtling through the void of space toward the coordinates where the Vanguard had last been. Aria Harper stood at the helm, her jaw clenched, eyes narrowed as she watched the view screen. The Ender's ship still loomed ahead, its cold presence a constant threat. Behind them, their fleet of fighters had been picked off one by one, the fighters' tiny forms flickering out of existence like fireflies in a storm. "Captain," Monroe said, voice tense. "The Vanguard is still on course. We're approaching their position. But we're getting readings." Aria held up a hand, silencing her. "What kind of readings?" Monroe's brow furrowed. "Massive distortion. Energy spikes. Whatever's going on with that ship, it's not just about survival anymore." A cold shiver ran down Aria's spine, but she kept her composure. "How much farther?" 10 minutes, Monroe answered. "We'll be in range before that," Aria said, already moving toward the tactical station. "Prepare for docking procedures. We don't know what kind of condition they're in. Get medical teams ready." Monroe nodded and quickly relayed the orders. But something was off. There was a sense of urgency in the air that no one could shake. The Titan was too battered, too outgunned to be making these kinds of maneuvers. They were practically throwing themselves into the lion's den. But Aria's mind was set. If there was a way to turn the tide, the Vanguard would hold the key. The Titan closed in on the Vanguard's position, a small, battered vessel drifting like a dead star in the emptiness. Its hull was scarred, blackened in places as if it had survived a dozen near-death encounters. Yet, there was something about it, a quiet energy that pulsed beneath the surface, a defiance in its very structure. "Prepare for docking," Aria called, her voice calm despite the storm brewing in her chest. "We need to get inside and find Captain Price." The crew responded in a flurry of activity, but all eyes were on Aria as she strode toward the docking bay doors, flanked by a handful of her most trusted officers. They were met by a scene that stopped her in her tracks. The interior of the Vanguard was eerily silent. The lights flickered overhead as Aria and her team moved down the narrow corridor, weapons ready but lowered. The ship's air was heavy with the scent of burned metal and ozone, a remnant of the battle it had surely just endured. "Captain Price?" Aria called into the silence, her voice echoing through the hall. There was no immediate response. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward, ragged, haggard, but unmistakable. Captain Ethan Price, his face gaunt, eyes sunken from exhaustion, stood before her. "Captain Harper," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I'm glad you made it." Aria's relief was fleeting. There was something wrong, something more than just the strain of a long battle. Price's eyes darted nervously as he gestured for her to follow him. "We've got a bigger problem than you know," Price said quietly as they made their way deeper into the ship. "The Enders, they're not just here to destroy us. They're trying to erase us. Wipe us from existence." Aria's brow furrowed. "Erase us?" "Yes," Price replied, shaking his head. "And it's worse than you think. It's not just a matter of defeating their forces. They're using some kind of weapon to rewrite reality itself. I don't know how it works, but they've been testing it on human colonies for years." "Testing it?" Aria repeated, her pulse quickening. "You're saying they've been changing history? Changing the fabric of reality?" Price nodded grimly. "Exactly. And it's working. Earth, New Eden, they've all been affected. Not just in the way we remember, but in the very bones of our history. The Enders are rewriting everything. They're not just conquering us, they're making sure we never existed in the first place." Aria stopped in her tracks. "That's impossible." "Tell me about it," Price muttered. "We've been on the run for months, trying to understand their technology, trying to find a way to stop them. But everything we do, every plan we make, seems to be one step behind them. And now, they've activated their weapon. If we don't stop them now, it's over. The Enders will erase humanity completely." "How?" Aria asked, her voice tight with disbelief and fear. We've pinpointed the source of their weapon. It's tied to their main ship. It's not just a weapon of destruction, it's a weapon of unmaking. Price turned to face her, his eyes locking with hers. They've built a rift generator. If they activate it, they'll rewrite our entire timeline. Everything we know, everything we've fought for, it will be as if it never existed. They'll erase us from history itself. Aria's mind raced. If what Price was saying was true, then they weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for existence. The Enders weren't just conquering humanity, they were trying to erase the very idea of humanity from the universe. "And you think we can stop it?" she asked, voice low but determined. "We have one shot," Price said, his expression darkening. "But we need to get aboard their flagship. We need to destroy the rift generator before they can activate it. We're running out of time." Aria looked around the Vanguard's dimly lit corridors, feeling the weight of the mission settle on her shoulders. "You're asking us to board the most heavily armed ship in the galaxy, and destroy the heart of their technology?" Price didn't flinch. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, there will be no New Eden. No humanity. We will cease to exist." There was a beat of silence. Aria's breath caught in her throat. The enormity of what they were facing crashed over her like a wave. But deep down, she knew there was no other choice. They couldn't, let it end like this. "Then we fight," Aria said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We fight, and we make sure humanity doesn't just survive, we make sure we're remembered. We make sure we never vanish from history." Price nodded, his weary face softening just slightly. "Then let's end this." With the plan set, Aria gathered her officers and Price's crew. They had a ship to board and a rift generator to destroy. They didn't have the luxury of time or certainty, but they had something the Enders didn't, each other. And Aria was ready to make sure the galaxy would remember humanity, no matter the cost. The cold metal floor of the Titan hummed beneath Aria's boots as she moved swiftly through the darkened halls of the ship. The crew had gathered in the briefing room, the mood tense but focused. There was no time for uncertainty now. They had a mission, and the Enders had to be stopped. Aria stood at the front of the room, the weight of the upcoming battle heavy on her shoulders. Price, along with a handful of his surviving crew, stood by her side. She could see the exhaustion etched into their faces, the same look that had been on her crew's faces for weeks. Yet, there was something else in their eyes, resolve. They knew what had to be done. "We move out in 10 minutes, Aria said, her voice steady and firm. "This will be the hardest fight we've ever faced, but it's the only one that matters." Her gaze swept over her crew, Monroe, Voss, the rest of her team. She saw the fire in their eyes. They knew the stakes. And they knew what they were risking. "We have one shot at this," Price added, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had lived through in the past months. "If we don't take out the rift generator, the Enders will erase humanity from existence. No more Earth, no more New Eden. Nothing." Aria nodded, understanding the gravity of their task. "We'll board their flagship. We'll fight our way to the generator, and we'll destroy it. That's our only mission. We're not coming back until it's done." "Any questions?" Monroe asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. The room fell silent. The crew was ready, though fear lingered in the air. It was the same kind of fear that had driven them to push harder, to survive against all odds. Aria met each of their gazes, her own resolve unwavering. "Good," Aria said. "Let's move." The docking bay doors opened with a metallic groan, and Aria, Price, and their teams stepped onto the launch platform. The fighters they'd brought with them lined up, ready to deploy. The battle was far from over, but it was time to take the fight to the enemy. Aria's fingers tightened around the controls as the ship launched into the black abyss of space, heading directly for the heart of the Ender flagship. The monstrous vessel loomed ahead, dark and intimidating. It had been the source of their pain, their fear. Now, it would be the source of their vengeance, or their doom. The Titan accelerated, moving with purpose, the rest of the fleet following closely behind. Aria's thoughts were sharp, every calculation laser-focused. This wasn't just a military operation, it was a race against time. Every second they wasted could be another moment the Enders used to complete their mission. "Prepare for combat," Aria said over the comms. "We engage at the outer perimeter. Take out their defenses, then we go in." "Understood," Monroe replied. The Titan and its fighters moved as one, weaving through the black void of space, a choreographed dance of destruction. Aria's heart pounded as she monitored the battle. Energy blasts flashed across the view screen, the Titan's shields flickering but holding steady. The Enders retaliated, but they were not prepared for the human tenacity that was about to be unleashed upon them. "Multiple enemy ships incoming," Voss shouted from the command deck. "Let them come," Aria said, her voice unwavering. "We're not turning back." The battle raged on around them. Fighters darted and weaved through laser fire, the sound of weapons discharging echoing across the comms. But Aria's focus never wavered. She could feel the weight of every action, every decision, knowing that failure wasn't an option. The Enders weren't just fighting for dominance, they were fighting to erase them from history. They couldn't let that happen. "We're close," Price's voice crackled through the comm. "We need to get aboard the flagship before they realize we're here." Aria's lips tightened into a grim line. "I know. Hold on." With a sudden surge of speed, the Titan plunged into the heart of the Ender flagship, dodging incoming fire as they flew deeper into the enemy's domain. The space around them grew darker, as though the very fabric of reality was shifting, warping under the influence of the Ender's technology. "Docking procedures," Aria ordered, her voice cold and precise. "We're going in." The Titan aligned itself with the massive docking bay of the flagship, the walls of the ship closing in around them. The ship's hull groaned under the strain as they made contact with the enemy ship's surface. "All teams, prepare to board," Aria said, her voice steely with determination. "This is it. Let's finish this." The air inside the Ender flagship was thick with tension as Aria and her team disembarked. The corridors were silent, the walls cold and unyielding. The ship's technology was far beyond human comprehension, yet it seemed almost primitive in its simplicity. The corridors stretched out before them, a maze of empty passageways. "Stay alert," Aria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know what kind of defenses they have inside." Price nodded. "The rift generator should be on the central command deck. We'll have to fight our way there." The team moved forward, weapons ready. Every step echoed through the cold silence of the ship. Aria's mind was laser-focused, the final objective clear. She could almost hear the hum of the rift generator in the distance, the heartbeat of the Ender's weapon that would erase humanity from existence. They encountered the first wave of Ender soldiers near the central deck. The battle was brutal, the Ender's advanced weaponry pushing them to the edge, but Aria's team fought with the desperation of those who knew what was at stake. Each step forward came at a cost, but they moved forward relentlessly. "Just a little further," Aria muttered, gritting her teeth as the enemy forces closed in. Finally, they reached the central command deck. The rift generator stood before them, an imposing mass of alien technology. The room pulsed with a strange energy, a dark glow filling the space. Aria's heart raced as she assessed the device. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, a fusion of technology and something darker, something that felt unnatural. "We need to destroy it," Aria said, turning to Price. "Now." Price nodded, stepping forward with a small explosive device in hand. "This should do it. Everyone clear the area." The explosive was set. As they stepped back, Aria couldn't help but feel a strange sense of finality. They had done it. The Enders would be stopped. With a deafening roar, the rift generator detonated, sending shockwaves through the ship. The Titan shuddered violently as the flagship began to disintegrate around them. The reality around them seemed to warp, but the blast had sealed their fate. The Enders were no more. The Titan pulled away from the collapsing ship, leaving behind a trail of fire and destruction. As the Titan shot through the void of space, Aria let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Humanity had won. The Enders would never erase them from history. Mission accomplished, Aria said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. We're still here.